Right, well, for anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Eleanor Bryan and I am a copywriter, which generally means that I write content for businesses. So that includes things such as blogs and SEO content, which Tommy has kindly touched on, website copy, advertising campaigns, social media training more recently, proofreading and editing, and basically anything involving words. So that could be an email that you need to send to a high-profile client. It could be a brochure that you want to send out to get somebody else on board with your company. But I cannot fit all of this into 45 minutes. So what I'm going to try and do today is leave a little bit of space at the end. I will be hanging around in the first break. Unfortunately, I have to go after the first break. But if anyone does have any questions on these things, I know a few people had like the red card up when we were talking about SEO. If you do have any questions on these things, maybe write them down throughout this presentation, and then we can have a bit of a Q&A towards the end. But today, the title of my presentation is Stop Being Boring. So Tommy actually saw me do a variation of this presentation a few years back. So please don't take it personally. But what you do in your job, to most people in the world, is boring. What I do is boring. I'm a copywriter. I just sit at a laptop and just tap away. What you do, a lot of people in the outside world are going to think is boring. It's a symptom of like spotlight syndrome. Has anyone heard of spotlight syndrome? Spotlight syndrome is basically the idea that because we are in ourselves, we automatically think that everything is interesting that happens in our lives. If you think about something that you did, I bet you can think about a million things that you did that have been embarrassing in your lives. You won't be able to think of more than like 3 or 4 where other people have embarrassed themselves. Yet we go home and we're like, oh my God, I can't believe I said that in that conversation. Nobody cares because the spotlight for you is on you and the spotlight for them is on them. People will not be interested in what you do unless you make them interested in what you do. And as I say, don't take this personally. I did this presentation to a room full of, I think it was like 200 FSB members, and they all had very different businesses. I accuse all of them of being boring. So it's not just you. But today, in the 42 minutes we have left, I'm going to try and give you 3 steps that you can implement immediately to make your content more engaging. And that's across things like emails, it's across your social media, it's across your blog posts and your website content. These are 3 tips that I've put together that you can basically use across whatever written format you are using. First of all, understanding your audience. Now, in the legal sector, a lot of things that you do have legal jargon involved. So if you're writing something, you tend to have to use a certain type of dialect, a certain way of wording things that sounds very, very polished and very, very professional. See a few nods in the room. Now, a big problem with this is that this can often translate to how you communicate with your customers. And your customers are not legal experts. How many people have received this email? Show of hands. You all have. If anyone who hasn't got the hand up, you are lying to me. You have received an email that starts with, hello, I hope you're well. Tommy doesn't do this anymore. He used to do it. So when someone sends an email like this, you probably have another 10 emails in your inbox that day that all start with this same introduction. Imagine you come in, you've had a great weekend, it's work, it's Monday morning, you sit down at your computer, you open up your inbox. Hello, I hope you're well. You're like, oh God, it begins. We've got another week of this, another week of people sending me these boring emails. And a lot of the time, you will be doing it yourself. You're thinking, oh, I've got to write an email. How am I going to start it off? I know, I'll just put, I hope you're well. It's a nice, polite thing to say. But what you're doing is, it is a nice, polite thing to say. It is the done thing in a certain way. But it's not making your email stand out in any way to whoever's receiving it, because they've got 10 other ones in their inbox that say that as well. Now, this is, none of my slide animations seem to be working. And the spacing is also wrong. So I can only apologise. I don't know if something weird's happened when I've sent it over to you, but that should not be like that. Anyway, this should be a nicely spaced out email. I, fortunately, in my life, have not actually had to deal with many lawyers from a client perspective, which is good, because I'm a good girl. There was one instance in which I did, which was when I was buying my house. And I got this email from the person who was going to be doing the conveyancing. And she sent me this. She said, I hope this email finds you well. Is me, angry face at the top. Thank you for instructing me in your conveyancing matter. I will oversee the transaction, including the review of title documentation, resolution of any pre-contract inquiries, and negotiation terms up to exchange and completion. This representation is subject to our usual anti-money laundering checks, and I shall issue a client care letter detailing fees, disbursements, and our scope of work. Feel free to contact me should you have any questions or require clarification. I look forward to acting on your behalf and ensuring the conveyance proceeds smoothly and in accordance with your interests. I think we can all agree that is legal jargon. That is lawyer speak. That is the type of thing you expect to read in a report in courts and in the legal documentation, or if you're writing a will, something you'd expect there. It was I hope this email finds you well. It's boring. All of the documentation bit, confusing. Representation anti-money laundering is just unnecessary. And this end bit, very wordy, very exclusionary. The email did not find me well. The email found me like this. It was my first house. I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. I'd just been working with the world's worst estate agents who had messed up so many parts of the sale, I was losing all hope. The email did not find me well. The people that you're writing to in your client base, no matter what you do in the legal sector, they are not legal experts. They don't want to be seeing legal jargon. They are concerned about whatever they're going through. If you're representing them in court, they're concerned. If you're doing their will, they're concerned. They want to make sure it's right. If you are helping them buy a house, they are concerned. They want to make sure it doesn't fall through. They want to know that you can be trusted to resolve their issue. So, what I would recommend, what she could have sent me, is this email on the right. Thanks for getting in touch. Congratulations on finding your new home. It's a very exciting time for you, and we're here to make sure we dot all the I's and cross all the T's. I'll begin drafting up the paperwork you'll need to proceed with the purchase. I'll send over a formal letter outlining our fees, scope of work, next steps in the process. If you have any questions at all, big or small, I'm only a phone call away. Are you happier to receive that email if you're buying a house? You are much happier, and it says the exact same thing. All of that big list of things that she was going to do, I don't know what any of that is. I'm not a legal professional. I just need to know that she's handling the paperwork and it's going to be okay. And the nice little congratulations. I'm like, oh, she's acknowledged that I'm a human being. Thank you, I am buying a new home. I will accept your congratulations. Just little things like that in the way that you communicate with your client are going to give them a little bit of that happy feeling, because that is an email that someone would be happy to read. And at the end of the day, you want your client to come away satisfied, to come away happy. Even if the sale had fallen through, she's spoken to me like I'm a person, and I know that she's tried her best. Point number 2, leverage your structure. What is your goal as a reader? Now, I was supposed to ask you this, and then they were supposed to come up, but they're already on there. So we're going to have to skip ahead on this. Now, your goal as someone writing anything in your business, whether it's a blog post, whether it's a social media post, whether it is your email to your client and things like that, is to make it easier for the reader. Now, in order to do this, we have to anticipate any questions they might have. Or, if we can't anticipate any questions, we invite them to ask questions. So in that email that I showed you before, there could have been a lot of questions I had as someone buying a house. It would have been impossible for her to think of all of them and put them in an email. And if she did, I'd be like, why has she sent me a 10-page essay? But I was invited at the end to ask any questions that I might have had. But if you're sending something out to somebody, whether it's a colleague or whether it's some information that you're sharing about an event like this, for instance, you've got to think, right, okay, what type of questions is the person who's going to receive this going to have? Are there any that I can cover that's going to save my time, because I don't have to send a response, and save their time because they don't have to chase it up? There's another barrier to engaging with me if they then have to chase it up. So for instance, if I was putting out a social media post about this event, I've got to include things like where it is, when it is, who's going to be there, what time is it, is there going to be lunch? Very important question. So anticipate their questions and personally engage with them. And this is the bit that I feel like a lot of legal professionals in particular miss out on, because they're so bogged down with the corporate jargon. So adding those little personal touches is something that's going to really help. Now, I never would recommend this to many people, but if you struggle with something like this, the best thing you can do, particularly for email communications, particularly for social media, is to write something and give it to AI, put it in ChatGPT, Claude, whatever you want to use, and say, how can I add a bit of personality? And it will give you the world's most cringiest suggestions, and you should not do that, but you should think, right, okay, well, it's changed that bit, which means it's identified that bit as being a bit boring. How can I potentially change that myself to add a bit more personality? Instead of starting an email with, I hope you're well, which every time you see that, I want you to just like have a mental image of me like banging my head against the wall. Could I maybe say, oh, right, oh, how was that break you went on the weekend? Or something like that that's like, oh yeah, I remember you're a human being. I'm not just giving you an I hope you're well, which is a careless start to an email because you haven't had to put in any effort to write it. Now, the other ways that you can use your structure to help you is through something called the journalistic triangle. I'm so sorry because my slides were actually beautiful before they got cut up and messed up. Is the journalistic triangle. Has anybody heard of this? No. Okay, right. Well, this is a copywriting technique, but it's applicable across a range of different things, even if it's even video content. We are taught in schools that the best way to build up an argument is you generally have your introduction, your middle bit, or your conclusion. You start off, you give a bit of background information, you lay the foundations of something. You then move on, you flesh it out, you have a few more details added in, and then you add your conclusion, you hammer it home. You bring home that content, you're like, this is my point, I have made it, wonderful, mic drop, off you go. That is the worst way that you can engage with any of your clients across any platform. Because what you actually need to do is flip it on its head. So the journalistic triangle is to essentially invert that. The first thing you do should be your most newsworthy information, the most important bit of information. Then you have your important details, and then you have the other background information. Because one thing that you should always consider is that your client is not as invested in your business as what you do. They might think that what you do is boring. So we want to make it as easy as possible for them to pick out the key information and be like, actually, this is interesting. I'm going to read it in its entirety. So always assume that they're only going to read the first few sentences to see if they want to read the rest of it. So with that in mind, your first few sentences need to be your most important point. And we do that through key sentences and topic sentences. So key sentences, a key sentence is the first bit at the top, which is, as I say, your first few lines, which explain exactly, in a nutshell, whatever communication you're talking about is about. So your LinkedIn post, first line, because they have to read the first line, then they click see more. Because they're not going to click see more if your first line's a bit rubbish. On an email, they're not going to read the rest of your email if your first line doesn't explain exactly what you want to talk about. On a blog post, they're going to click on it and see, oh, well, do I want to read that? I'll read the first little bit. If that's interesting, yes, I might read on. And then your topic sentences and paragraphs. So I don't think that a lot of people are aware of this, but you will all do this. And now that I've said it, you will notice yourself doing it in your everyday life. So, oh, sorry, is that? Yeah, I've got plenty of time. So you'll notice yourself doing it in your everyday life. You will read through an email, or you will read through a blog article, or you'll read through the newspaper, anything that you read. And before you read anything, you'll have a little bit of a skim. And your skim will generally consist of the first few lines, and then the first line of every paragraph. And you'll do that just to see is this relevant? Do I want to read this? Oh, actually, yeah, it's quite interesting. I think I will read it in a bit more detail. Now, your topic sentences are the sentences that start every paragraph. And whenever you write something, after you've finished writing it, I want you to have a little look back and go through your topic sentences and think, right, if I only read the key sentence, which is the top bit, and then the first sentence of every paragraph, would I have learned everything I need to know? And if the answer is yes, then you've done a really good job. You've communicated the core argument through even to the people who are skimming. Obviously, the people who then want to read in a bit more detail can read the full thing and they get the full goss on everything that you're on about. But you've communicated it even to people who don't have the time to read it. And that is the best way you can do it. And that feeds into your structure as well. So if you see these lines that I've done, they're sort of representative of the way that you structure your sentences. So if I'm actually going to go back a few slides. If I go back to this, the one that's spaced out looks a lot less daunting than the one on the left. The one on the left is just like you receive that, you open your email and you're like, oh my goodness, a huge block of text I'm going to have to get through. This is in nice, easy to digest chunks. But a lot of people think like a paragraph has to be like 4 or 5 sentences. But you'll notice in that one, actually, I have paragraphs there that are just 1 sentence. But it's fine, it makes it stand out, it makes it very easy to digest. So that is what I'm trying to get across with these lines here. And you should always add a call to action. Now, the call to action could be, if it's a blog post, for instance, on something that you're doing, your call to action could be to get in touch if they have any questions. Your call to action could be to explore the rest of your blog posts or book a consultation. In an email, sometimes you don't need a call to action, especially if the transaction is over, because if you keep adding calls to action, you'll just end up in a constant loop of emails. But your call to action could be, like the one in the example that I gave, if you have any questions, drop me a message. So make sure that you have that at the end, because that's the last thing that people are reading, and that's the next thing that they want to do afterwards. So the journalistic triangle feeds into it in that regard. Lastly, practice what you preach. Now, I'm going to spend quite a little bit of time on this one, and it's really important. In many cases, I don't practice what I preach. I spend a lot of time writing blog articles, website content, LinkedIn posts, all of these things for a lot of other clients. The last thing I want to do in my spare time is do it for myself. But in the legal profession, you kind of do need to practice what you preach. There are 3 different ways that people are going to experience your business. They're either going to have a personal experience, they're going to be working with you. They're either going to learn something about you through your online presence and through your marketing channels, or they're going to learn about you through word of mouth. Now, your personal experience and your online presence feeds into word of mouth, because people, oh yeah, I really need help with writing my will. Be like, oh, well, I know so-and-so does that. They might say that through having seen a LinkedIn post that you've put out. They might say that, oh yeah, I saw a blog article that they did about helping someone with their will and they saved them loads of money. Or, oh, actually, I know somebody else who's had a will written by this person, therefore I'm going to recommend them. You can't particularly control the word of mouth without doing a good personal experience and having some good marketing. But a lot of the time we just focus on the personal experience and the marketing is considered like a smaller circle. But the sweet spot is to be in the middle of that and have all three of those rings reflecting the exact same brand that you're trying to convey. And now we move on to my main slide. So your brand: professional, trustworthy, approachable, transparent, knowledgeable and experienced, and effective. Raise your hand if this describes your brand that you work for. Sometimes. We're using the green things, very nice. If it doesn't describe your brand, then I'm a bit concerned if you're not a trustworthy legal company. In most cases, people in the legal sector would say that these are words that they would want people to associate with their brand image. Now, a lot of the time, these are things that they would just consider. That, yeah, we might have like a little values session with our employees. We might sit down and have a meeting, right, what are our team's core values? Oh yeah, we're this, we're this, we're this, we're this, we're this. And none of it matters if your customer doesn't think that. And your customer can only think that through marketing and through experience with you. And the experience with you comes after their experience with the marketing side of things. So if they engage with some marketing content that you've put out there that does not have these qualities, they will not think that of you, and they might go to somebody else who has those qualities. So if you want to be professional, then that'll be the way that you conduct yourself. So that'll be the way that you speak to your client, that'll be the emails that you send out, that might be the LinkedIn posts that they see. And I do appreciate that in the legal profession, you can't be, for instance, dropping memes on your LinkedIn account because you think it's relatable. There is some sort of degree of removal that your clients are expecting to see from anyone in the legal sector. There's a different degree of professionalism to people in my business. So for instance, I'm a copywriter. I can basically write whatever I want, and as long as it's creative, people are going to be like, that is a demonstration of her being creative in her writing. Whereas if some of you, as I say, put out things like memes or like started sharing jokey LinkedIn content, people might think, that's not the professional approach that I would expect someone in the legal sector to have. So it's the striking the balance between the professional and the engaging that we talked about before. Trustworthy. How many people, Tom's already sort of asked this, how many people ask their clients to leave them a review after they've worked with them? A good amount of people, really good. Because your clients, if they search you for the first time, they're going to go to your Google reviews. So it's important that they see some really good ones on there. And like we said, a lot of the time, we don't really think about doing a Google review or something like that unless we've had a bad experience. So you know that if someone's got loads of good Google reviews, you're like, either they've been proactive with their marketing strategy, they've said to the clients afterwards, please would you leave a Google review, it would really help us. Or people have gone out of their way to leave a good review, in which case you know they're amazing. So to be trustworthy, you need to be doing that. If you're not doing that, how are your clients going to know that you're trustworthy? Social proof is another one, like Tom was saying, you can have like some video testimonials, fantastic on your social media pages. Approachable. Approachable goes back to what I showed you with the emails. One of those emails was approachable, one of them was not. The first email was arguably much more professional, but it was the wrong type of professional. It was professional to another person in the legal sector. It wasn't professional to a client who has no idea what they're doing and is that little girl crying that was me when I was speaking to my solicitors. And being transparent. Now, transparency is a really important one. Would anyone say that they prioritise transparency in the legal sector? A couple of hands. I would say that remaining transparent is one of the most important things for any business, really, because you don't want to think that the business has got anything to hide from you, that you want their pricing structures to be transparent, you want their communication to be transparent, you want to know that they're giving you all of the information that they can. And the best way to prove your transparency, if you're a legal business, is through something like a blog page. So I'm going to briefly touch on SEO, and I can apologise if anybody is already really familiar. But if you have an SEO strategy on your website, we might decide you want to rank on Google for legal firm in Lincoln, for instance. And you can work with a copywriter such as myself, or you can work with Tom and the guys at Legal Growth to make sure that your SEO on your website is spot on. And if someone searches legal firm in Lincoln, you will come up and you're like, fantastic, yes, I'm on the first page of Google. If you're on the second page of Google, you don't exist. But if you have a blog page, it gives you the opportunity to rank for what we refer to as long tail keywords. So your ideal client isn't always searching for things like legal firm in Lincoln. They're searching for things like what constitutes unfair dismissal at work? And then, because they're not sure if they've been unfairly dismissed at work. They're asking for things like, is it illegal for an employer to give a bad reference? They're asking for, what type of lawyer do I need to work with if I'm buying a house in this area? Or what things do I need to consider when writing my will? Someone searching what things do we need to consider when writing my will is not immediately thinking, I'm going to get a law firm involved. They're thinking, maybe I can do this myself. Maybe I can save myself some money. And then, if you've got a blog article that ranks for that keyword, that long tail keyword, that comes up and they find it like, oh yeah, look, a legal firm's giving me some information there about how to do it myself. I can click on that. I'm reading through it and I'm like, bloody hell, there's a lot to do. I can't do this by myself. But it's okay because the call to action at the bottom of that blog is get in touch with our firm, book a free consultation, we'll walk you through it. They already know that you know what you're talking about because they've engaged with your article. You've laid it out exactly what you need to do. You've been transparent. But you get to the bottom and they're like, oh, actually, this does look quite difficult. This company quite clearly knows what they're talking about. I've already developed some trust in them because I'm trusting their article. I'm going to book a consultation and potentially find out more. Really good example I can give is I did some work for an ESG software company. Does anyone know what ESG is? ESG is environmental social governance. If you're like a big private equity firm, you kind of have to comply with like sustainability regulations. And ESG is incredibly complicated. There are so many legal regulations. There's so many rules, and all the rules are different, whether you're in the EU or you're not in the EU, if you're in different countries, if you're in some different local areas that have different ESG regulations. And they'd done this amazing website ranking for ESG software. We don't understand why our website is just not getting the hits, because it comes up on Google on the first page when you type in ESG software. I was like, right, but are your clients typing that in? Your clients are grappling with these horrible laws and regulations that they just can't get to grips with. And they're Googling, what is the SFDR regulation in my area? What ESG metrics do I have to comply with in my area? So we put up this blog strategy to rank for every single one of those queries that someone could be searching in a search engine. And now 90% of their website traffic comes to them through their blog page. 90%. Because they're not always going to be searching for exactly what you do. Now, we move on to knowledgeable and experienced. How can you get across how knowledgeable and experienced your firm is? It's pretty simple. You can talk about what you do. Now, there are going to be some things as legal people that you can't talk about, but there might be some things that you can if you put a different name to it. You don't have to say, we spoke to so-and-so on this date and we did this for this person. We can say, right, we spoke to a client called Bob. Bob was struggling with this. It was a real issue for him because of X, Y, and Z. He came to us, he spoke to us, we put together this plan, we solved his problem. And then anyone else who's in that situation can be like, oh, look, they've already solved it for Bob, they can help me as well. And they know that you're knowledgeable and experienced in that regard. And effective. They want to know that you're actually going to do what you say that you're going to do. And a lot of that boils down to all of the above. So if you're communicating all these things across your social media channels, across your blogs, and you need to really communicate your successes as well as just what you're doing in the business. So I see a lot of people on LinkedIn, for instance, nowadays, and they'll post, for instance, I dropped one this morning. I was like, yes, I'm at this conference. It's having a great time. We post a lot about what we're doing outside of the business, to try and get more leads or to try and remain active in our business community. We don't post that much about our successes in our job. So I realised that a while back. I was like, actually, I need to be saying, oh, look at this, look at the increase in traffic that this client has seen. Look at what I've done here. Look what they had and look what they've got now, and it's so much better, and we're having a much better response. I want you to think about how you can communicate whether or not what you're doing in your company is effective and how it's helping your clients. Does anyone have an example of a time when they have communicated how their firm is effective that they can think of? I'm going to go with you.
Okay, so when I go and visit a client, I drive maybe 100 yards down the road and then just do a little video in my car, just obviously without giving names, but saying I'm here in Barnet, Hertfordshire, and I've just met a lady who's in her 80s with her 2 children in their 50s. We discussed X, Y, Z. This is the solution I'll be working on over the next couple of weeks. So just simple things like that.
I regret picking you because that's a fantastic example. There's nothing I can add to that. That is exactly what everybody should be doing.
But then I repurposed that on different platforms, and my networking very
That's amazing. It does several things. It shows you that obviously your strategy and exactly what you do. We know now that you're willing to travel to somebody else's house, so people don't need to worry about that. People also will know that you're busy, which is another thing that I think people don't realise is actually a factor when people want to deal with you. Particularly if you're self-employed. I see a lot of people who post on LinkedIn 24/7 who are self-employed. And all I think when I see that, I don't think, oh, look at them, they've got a really proactive marketing strategy. I look at them and I think, they've got no work on, how have they got time to do all that? Has anyone else had that thought? When you see someone, they're posting every single day, and you're like, yeah, it takes me like a good hour to put together a LinkedIn post. I can't be doing that every single day. I've got things to do. And 99% of the time, the people who have the time to do that are people who have not got a lot of work on. Whereas if you're just stopping on the way to a job, recording a little quick video, it's not taking you a lot of time to do that because it's a video, so you've not had to like edit it, you've not had to sit there and really have a think about what you want to type. And you are actually out and about doing something. It's saying, hey, look, I'm being proactive on LinkedIn whilst doing my job, not as because I don't have anything else on. That's a really, really good example. What was your example, sorry?
So the NHS continued healthcare review, which is really a technical thing to do, but the key message was we saved the family £73,000 a year in care costs, which the NHS were now going to fund. And so we obviously anonymised it, put it on socials, and it was our biggest engagement. It was a backup because we saved the family 73 grand.
That's unbelievable. That is a fantastic example. Now, if you go onto someone's website and they've got a beautifully structured website, it's very fancy, click on the buttons, you can tell they spent a lot of money on a web developer to make this website. All looks very polished, all looks very professional. Professional, very important for your brand. Is that going to convert you as much as it is hearing something like that? You've saved someone 5 figures. It's a huge amount of money to save. They're like, well, there's some social proof there. That's going to be much more effective than any other type of marketing, which is why I saved it till last, because it is the most important thing. Proving that you're good at what you do should be, I'd say, 20% of your posts. Other ones you can write, you can have sales ones, you can be like, oh yeah, I'm doing this, but it's when people get too salesy and they're posting every single day to try and get new sales that you know that they've actually not got that much on. Having something like that where you can prove that you've done a really good job is going to be 10 times more effective than just looking professional and having everything look polished. And I'm going to briefly talk as well about how you can do this through social media. So I imagine a lot of people here are active on LinkedIn. Yeah, we see some nods. Very good. Yes, of course.
How do you balance showing off with showing how experienced and knowledgeable you are? Because I could put a website post on my LinkedIn today saying we just completed £600 million worth of renewable projects. That sounds like showing off, but it also shows we're knowledgeable and experienced.
If you had, I'm just going to say this to the room, if you were thinking of working from a company, and they're working with a company, and they said, what was it that you'd done? 6 million?
£600 million worth of renewable projects.
You'd funded £600,000 worth of...
600 million.
Sorry, 600 million, sorry. £600 million pounds worth of renewable projects. Are you going to think, show off, I'm not working with them?
That's what I was asking.
Would anyone think that? No. Nobody would think that. People would think, wow, that's really good. It's showing off if you are trying to you're trying to prove that you're better than what you've actually done. You know what I mean? So if I, for instance, came and spoke to you guys today, and I started basically spamming social media, being like, can you believe 70 people wanted to hear me talk? I am amazing. That is showing off. But if I say, oh, I went to this conference today, it was so good, there was a lot of really interesting people there, they had some great questions, and we spoke about this, and this, that's not showing off, that's just telling you what I've done. It's all about the tone of voice and the way that you phrase it. And I think there is kind of a bit of a historic idea that we shouldn't talk about our successes, because if we do, then we look like we are showing off. We look like we're bragging. But I'd invite you to, next time you see someone talking about their successes, I'd invite you to look at that person and think, or that post or that conversation that you're having, and think, do I think this person's showing off, or am I happy for that person? In the majority of cases, we're not horrible people, and we will think, that is fantastic. No one can deny that what you've done there is great. And nobody would, if you told the world and its dog in every conversation you had with someone, you introduced that as a topic, that's when people would think, oh, God, calm down. No, I think what you should do is, you should go away, you should write that down, have a little look at it. Best tip I can give you is when you do write a blog post, don't put it out on the same day. Come back to it the next day, have a little read through it once you've done it, and be like, when you've got fresh eyes, you'll see things that you didn't see before. Give it to somebody else to have a read and say, do you think that this sounds braggy? I can tell you 99% of the time, unless you have been an insufferable person, they're going to say, no, it sounds amazing. I didn't realise you did that. That's fantastic. And it's not, you're in a business situation as well. If you're doing this in your personal life, then it might be a bit braggy. So like, I don't know, if you built a wall in your garden and you wouldn't shut up about it to everybody. You post a picture every day like, look at this wall, it's fantastic. I'm saying that because I built a wall recently and I was that person. I was that insufferable person. Oh, guys, I built a wall. And everyone's like, wow. And then next week I was like, did I tell you about that wall? I built, yes, you told us, go away. If you keep ramming it down people's throats, that's when they're going to get annoyed with it. But once you get a blog on your website and you have something like that, you can just leave it there. You don't have to ram it down people's throats. You can maybe think, right, okay, I'm going to set myself a schedule and have, in a few months' time, I might speak about that again. But I'm not going to talk about it every single week. Because if it's every single week, then, yeah, people will think, yeah, that's great the first time they see it. Second time they see it, they'll be like, yeah, I see why he's wanted to talk about that again. But the third time they see it, they'll be like, is this all he's done? You know? They can think, why don't he move on to something else? You know what I mean? Yeah. So I think you really should be shouting about that because that's a huge accomplishment. And you shouldn't be afraid that people will think that do you know what, actually? Sorry, I'm gonna rephrase that. Next time you think something like that, try and put yourself in the other person's shoes. If you heard somebody had done that, would you think, what a show off? You wouldn't. You'd think that's great. You'd be like, fantastic work.
Professional to professional. It was from the client.
Yeah. And I forgot where I was at then. Oh, no, it's completely fine. Actually, just while we're on that, while I try and remember where I was, does anyone else have any questions about anything like SEO-wise or... Yes.
Yeah, so it's kind of, I've just started with Bing because Google
Yeah.
obviously represents probably about 88%. Bing's about 12%. So I'm working with a guy that I've worked with for years on a cruise business. And so what we're doing is we're starting a budget, just about £300-400 a month to spend plus the admin fee, just to see how things work. Now, Bing's slightly different to Google, but nonetheless, I reckon that once I've trialled it on Bing, then I can then say, right, that works, I can validate it, and then I can pick it up and drop it into Google for pay-per-click.
Yeah.
What's about that?
I think it's a really good idea. A lot of AI models use Bing as well. So a lot of people are moving over from rather than just Google Analytics to making sure that they cover different search engines. Show of hands, who uses Bing rather than Google?
Sometimes, not all the time. Yeah. It's preloaded onto a load of laptops.
Yeah.
So it's kind of...
Yeah, I think that's the thing. A lot of people... I think you've got to be mindful of your demographic there. So for me, the only time that I used Bing was when I got my new laptop, I used it to download Google, and then I've never touched it since. Occasionally, it'll be like, set me as your default browser, and I'm like, go away.
I'm analysing, and if you are targeting an older population, Bing's your place.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. A lot of people.
Because it's a default setting.
Yeah, so the people who are on that are the people who haven't had the wherewithal to click on Bing and then download Google. So I think it's amazing that you're covering all bases, but do make sure that, like that 12%, for instance, that your efforts are proportional to that. So if you were a will agency, then yeah, that might be great because you've got a lot of older people there who are at a point in their lives where they're thinking, yeah, might be good if I start writing a will. But if, for instance, you were targeting, for whatever reason, in whatever company you're working for, if you were targeting, for instance, like a teenage demographic, I can tell you're not going to find them on Bing. So that goes back to what we spoke about at the start, like understanding your audience, putting yourself in your audience's shoes and thinking, right, okay, are the people that I want to engage with here, or are they elsewhere?
The other thing I do is with Active Campaign, I'll message IFAs differently than I would do, let's say, the 40, 50-year-old children of old folks, different message, different audience.
Oh, interesting. What do you do differently?
Well, if I'm talking to an IFA about their clients, the conversation is your clients might have these challenges and I can support you with this and let me give you some advice and maybe I can do something for them for free as a puppy dog sale. But then if my audience, the rest of my audience, I know from a demographic, they're the children of older folks. I'm talking about, care home cost protection, home protection trusts and so forth. So it's a different kind of conversation. And the case studies I'll use with IFAs will be again very differently worded. And again, I use ChatGPT for this to what I would use for, let's say, somebody who's in their 50s, 60s who's got mum in their 80s or 90s.
Perfect. What you've done there is step one of this entire presentation, which is understanding your audience. Before you've sat down and written anything and just sent it off willy-nilly without actually having to think, you've sat there and thought, right, how is this particular person going to interpret what I say? What can I do to make it easier for them? So I think what you're doing is truly a fantastic strategy so far. The only thing with the Bing is that have a little think about the type of people you want to target. But by the sounds of it, that is the type of person you want to target. Yeah. Sorry, did someone else over there had their hand up? Or did they not? No. Okay, well, I think we've got about 6 or 7 minutes left. I was actually discussing something, I can't remember where I was. But I think that's probably a good place to end it. So if anyone does have any questions about things like SEO or blog writing or any of the things that I discussed initially, then let me know. If you have any questions about social media, likewise, then now would be the time to raise your hands. Oh, we have a few, yes.
Blogs, length of blog, say 2,000 words, people say 600 words.
Should not be 2,000 words. Nothing should be 2,000 words. Nothing should ever be 2,000 words, unless it's like an essay or something. Or like about a white paper or something that people can like. The ideal amount of words, I always recommend between 600 and 800. But one of the most important things with blogs is the structure as well as what you say. So if you sit down there and you've got a title of your blog and then you've got literally 800 words and you think, that's it, I'm done. You're not done. Those 800 words need to be split up by H1 or H2 or H3 subheadings. And you should not have more than 200 words between each one. So the best way to do it is to basically have a little Google, like can you give me an example of a blog that you might have been writing? Some sort of blog about inheritance tax. So you might think, this is not good for me, this is not a topic I am really familiar with. But you have a little Google, and one of the best things you can do when you're writing a blog is, we spoke about the little AI thing that comes up on Google at the very start. Now, when you type your search query, you've got the AI thing. There's also, usually maybe you've got a couple of ads then, like sponsored websites rather. And then there's usually like a little box about this big with like 4 questions on it, and you can click on them and it's got a drop-down button. Yeah. Those are the questions that Google has decided are the most important questions, the most likely questions that are associated with whatever you've searched. And what it will do is when you click on it, you'll see that it's extracted those bits of information from other people's websites and just put them there so you don't actually have to click through on someone's website, but they're there nonetheless. When you're writing your blogs, try and use those questions as subheadings in your blog post so that you come up when people are searching for what your overarching H1 title is, but then the H2s are also there as backup, and you know that that's information that people are regularly looking for. There's a lot of tools you can use to find good search queries. One of them is Answer the Public. So if you search, for instance, inheritance tax, it'll come up with a bunch of questions that people are searching and like their click-through rates and things like that. And you can then use that to either make the blog that you've written more informative or create like a whole series of blogs, which is usually the best way. And I would say for whatever you're doing, I know some people like go full ham and they're like, oh yeah, we want a blog post every single day. You don't need to be doing it every single day. I'd say the best thing for like a self-employed person is to probably aim for maybe 2 a month if possible, and maybe do a little extra one out there if, for instance, you go and do something. Like, oh, I went to this event and here's what I found out. But that's more of like a news thing rather than like a part of your SEO strategy. Other question?
Really more of an opinion from yourself about the voice that you use. We find that when we write, we assume a lot of knowledge that people have gone out and done consumer research, but just don't understand it. So a lot of the time I find myself writing something and then putting it into ChatGPT and saying, rewrite this so an 11-year-old would, because I think a lot of the time we assume more knowledge and more intelligence, frankly, in the general public than there really is.
Yeah, people are really stupid. You go out and speak to someone, and I think as well, like you got to remember in your field, you're working with people who are all very knowledgeable in your area, so you kind of get a bit complacent with that, and you start to think, yeah, everybody knows what we're talking about in this regard. When actually, like with that conveyancing email, I had absolutely no bloody clue what any of the things that she said she was going to do were, but she will be hanging around with people in her industry, and she'll be thinking, oh yeah, well obviously they know what this is, because those are the people that we hang around with. It's like what Tom said about you being like the product of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. You then assume that everybody else has that base knowledge. One thing I would say if you're using ChatGPT to do those things is to make sure that you edit it thoroughly. So like from my perspective as a copywriter, I can spot ChatGPT a mile off. It's everywhere. And people don't, you need to first of all work on editing the content, because you know that by its very nature, it is going to be generic, because what it has done is crawled all of the internet and had a look at like, what is everybody else doing, right? Everybody else is doing this, so here's what I'm going to give you. And you don't want to be everybody else. You want to be you. You want to be your business. So great for idea generation, great for something like that, because it shows you, right, okay, well, if it's restructured this for someone who doesn't understand it, then what I've been saying there might have been really confusing people. Great for things like that, but just make sure you edit it. And it's things like removing sentences like, in today's fast-paced business environment, and things like, what are the things? Dashes everybody's obsessed with at the minute, which a load of people have tried to defend the M dash, but then actually, so you know when you have like a hyphen is generally the length of the letter N. The M dash is the length of the letter M. It's like a big long hyphen. And ChatGPT and like Claude and all of the AI models use big dashes all the time. You see it on LinkedIn. If you see someone with that on LinkedIn, you know that they haven't written that and that it's AI, because the M dash isn't even on a keyboard. So an actual human, in the majority of cases, unless you've got some really fancy, I don't know, have a look at this one. Nope, not on this keyboard. So if you see a really, really long dash that's longer than like your standard hyphen, you can basically rest assured that that person has used it. Do you have it on your keyboard?
It's like I'm a Spanish solicitor, so I have a Spanish keyboard.
There we go.
We have it there, so.
Okay, so Spanish people are the exception to this rule. Noted. But yeah, just little things like that like real tells. And it's a perfect example actually, because there's another thing that loads of AI models do at the minute, which is like, our business is not just this, it's this. Which normally people have been using that for ages, but like an AI model will give you that sentence structure like 10 times in the thing. And then but as soon as you start picking up on these things, you'll start to realize that actually this AI content is everywhere, and it doesn't translate well to high engagement because it's generic, and unless people have edited it in a lot of detail and injected their personality into it, it's not going to resonate with people, because people don't connect with robots, people connect with people. So yeah, definitely use ChatGPT, and it will really help you to be a bit more self-aware as to how stupid people can be and how much you need to dumb down what you do. Don't just lift it. Use it as like a tool rather than the solution. Any other questions?
Just one, if I may.
Yes.
Going on to the next point that you said about reading like an 11-year-old. It's a process and procedures, and I'll talk about it later on, but you guys as well in the compliance world, you've got to have it in a set way that's done. But a lot of process and procedures aren't followed because they may be overly complex, because if somebody's written it, not knowing how it's going to be read. What is it about the average reading age, I think, is that right? Am I right in thinking it's about 11, 12 years old, and there's a thing that you can use within Word, or am I just, do you know what I'm talking about there? The idea is that basically if you write a procedure that they're just not going to understand it, because it's not written for the average person, so to speak. But the average reading age in the UK is actually 11 years old, even those of us with as an adult. If you've got a master/PhD, then it might be to get to 13, 14 years old, which we can't correlate. The point being is that assumption that we're talking with people quite a lot, and we assume that they know what we're talking about, but our peers do. But the people working with, the clients we want to work with, they don't know. So the question is, do you know about this average reading age?
I didn't realise it was quite that young, but I do completely resonate with how sometimes it is appropriate to sort of, I don't want to describe it as dumbing down your writing, because that seems like a bit of a disservice to your clients. But for instance, when I was doing my PhD, the way that I would write a PhD thesis that's going to be read by another academic that is also well researched in that area is going to be entirely different than the way that I address a first year in a lecture. And it's not really so much about thinking about the reading age, it's about thinking of the empathy of that person. Like, for instance, if you're dealing with like an 80-year-old woman you said you were speaking to, like her mental faculties might not all be there. You don't know if she's struggling with stuff. You might want to make your font size a bit bigger. It's just really about sort of empathizing with that person. And a lot of the time, your first instance of dealing with a client isn't going to give you haven't got any information to go on maybe apart from like, oh, this is their name. It's just making that first bit of communication as palatable as possible, and then the more you communicate with them, the more you learn about them, the more you know how much jargon you can use, the more you know what type of language they're going to respond to, and it's making sure that's tailored for each person that you work with, and it's that personalisation that makes what you write more engaging, because we are in an age where people will just copy and paste templates, and that's not what resonates with people, because you know that's not curated for them. Does that make sense? Of course.
Because you said something really interesting. You said, I don't want to talk about dumbing down because it's doing your clients a disservice. I'd argue the exact opposite. You have to dumb it down, Otherwise, your clients simply don't understand what you're trying to tell them.
Oh no, I'm saying like you should definitely dumb it down, but I'm saying the word saying dumbing it down sounds like I'm offending that person. I wouldn't, yeah, you know what I mean? I wouldn't be like, right, Chris, don't worry, I'm just going to dumb it down for you here or something. Like, you know what I mean? I wouldn't like to say that, but that is what you're doing. But I wouldn't like to describe it as dumbing it down because then it sounds a bit offensive to whoever you're dealing with.
If you're writing an email to a client who's an accountant or a lawyer, as I have lots of business-to-business clients, well then I'm going to write it differently to maybe I would do with a couple who I know have got, let's say, the same education opportunities as I do. So it's really, understanding in whichever way you're presenting yourself, that's really, really relevant.
It's really relevant.
Because I wouldn't want to be presenting that same information to somebody who's a lawyer where I happen to be doing this way that I would do with somebody who's struggling, because he's expecting me to use certain terminology.
However, sorry, because I know we've gone over with the questions.
If he's using the terminology with you, you've got to be condescending towards him, do you?
Good point. However, if you were talking with someone in your field, does it have to be a really dry email like that first one?
No, God, no. I mean, when I think about those emails on the left-hand side, I don't know anybody who uses that kind of stuff today. Maybe some haven't been in this field for very long. But in my previous business, totally can't use, it's about making it sense in common language. It's interesting, the point I always thought, if you could write an email that can be understood by somebody with, let's say, GCSE in 16, that's probably about right for most people, I think.
Yeah, I think, sorry, was it, I might have forgotten what the question was. Was there a question?
It was more a comment
Oh,
about
right.
making sure that you represent the information specific to your audience. Don't be too condescending, but don't try to be too highfalutin as well.
Yeah, exactly. It's just striking that balance. I think that is definitely all we have time for. Pardon?
I was going to say, yeah, we'll draw stumps on questions if we may, please.
You'll what?
Draw stumps.
Oh, yes. Sorry, I've not heard that term. I will be out in the break anyway, so if anyone does have any questions, I will be going after the break, unfortunately. But thank you very much for listening to me, and thank you for all your wonderful questions. And, yeah, don't be boring, guys.